commemorative issue of On Stage magazine for the Holt Center, the very first opening night. So it's kind of fun to look at. It's from 1982 on opening night, plus the ticket for Marilyn Horn. So that's kind of show and tell. I had an MPC meeting the other day, although I won't go into the details of that. I got the opportunity to be the keynote speaker at graduation today for the Environmental Studies program, and so congratulations to all the U of O grads that made it, and all the parents that are now relieved, and so congratulations to all of them. I also got to go thank the last meeting of the Eugene Climate and Energy Action Plan Citizen Committee, and thank them for the work that they've done. They met 12 times over last year and guided that process and moved it forward, so that was a job really well done. I got to be part of at least the first part of the Envision Eugene 3-day workshop. I wasn't able to make the second 2 days. And then I enjoyed reading an article about John. I didn't know you played piano and the saxophone.
I didn't either. That was new information.
So
cool.
It's so Clinton-esque.
And we just, when we have dinner beforehand, maybe we could get some entertainment sometime.
Absolutely not.
Just a thought.
In here, right?
There's a Sustainability Commission meeting this Wednesday, this room, McNutt, 5:30 to 8:30. We'll be talking about the action plan and the work plan of the Sustainability Commission.
Great. Thank you. Andrea?
I don't have anything to show and tell. So sad. Before I forget, I'd like to make an announcement that ORAP is doing an outreach at Red Cross on June 16th for those communities that are concerned about the air quality in West Eugene. I'm not really sure what the format is, but I'm hoping that there's going to be some chance for conversation about concerns that people have over there. So since the last time I met, the first thing before, also, Mayor, I wanted to know, when do we start talking about things for the United Front?
Well, our IGR meeting will start doing
we'll talk about that then, because I've got a couple of ideas. So
Good.
this
You can
last
start. You can already pass ideas
Yeah,
forward.
please pass them on to
Okay.
Brenda or myself.
So I attended the first day of the ECLA also with Alan, and Mike Clark was there. I'm glad to hear that one of the counselors was able to attend all 3 days. It was very inspiring to see so many people there from the community and willing to work together. I'm really glad that we're going through that process. I'm looking forward to whatever comes out of there to help guide us through this conversation. The second day of the ECLA, actually the Hispanic Commission for the State of Oregon met in Eugene, and so I attended most of that. People from all over the state dealing with issues that deal with people of the Latin community. So that was really interesting. Later in the day, I went to the Ganas assembly that they had at Kelly Middle School. They're a Latino youth empowerment group, and it's been at the high school. It's been about junior high school. It's been there for about 12 years, and so a lot of the kids that go through the Ganas program actually go on to college, and so it's really kind of a youth empowerment. So I'm really glad that that's there, and it was very entertaining. They honored several of the local folks that do a lot of work around immigrant issues. I also went to a graduation. My nephew graduated from North Eugene Alternative High School. Richard, congratulations. It was really it was not a traditional graduation, and all the kids got to speak about each other and kind of give each other, kind of like we do feedback, like, I honor you for, for your hairdo or whatever. I mean, it was just really, it was really good that the kids were able to articulate, what they saw positive in each other. I had breakfast with Mel Pine at the CEO group that he puts together quarterly. They talked about robots and surgery. That was very interesting. And I was honored at the We Are Bethel. I got the milk toast, and that was really cool.
A good thing?
It was a good thing.
Yeah, it was a good thing.
It was a good thing. They pass out milk to everybody in the community, and then they read a little bit about you, and then they toast you, and they give you an opportunity. And I just want to say that I was really glad to have Lorna Flormo there, who was with me when we did the Weed and Seed Grant, the Department of Justice Weed and Seed Grant, because that's where that came out of, and I didn't realize it's been 9 years since we've done that. So I think that has stuck, and I'm glad that that's a part of that community. I think that the way that we get to celebrate being Bethel is really cool.
Chris?
Thank you.
remember when this first came out. That's pretty cool. I have 3 items, actually 4 items. 2 of them, on the 7th of this month, the Housing Policy Board met to review applications for the next project that they're proposing to construct in Westmoreland, near the old Westmoreland School. And so they're still processing. They still need to have a hearing and some final meetings, and they will be forwarding something to the council for their final approval. On the 8th, I attended in the mayor's stead the Bailey Hill Safety Plaza dedication on Bailey Hill Road. As you know, that has gone from a 4-lane, wild and crazy, to a really, really nice project. In fact, if you want to point somebody to what's really great in terms of street development, Bailey Hill Road is really a great example. And they were dedicating a safety plaza to actually not just one, but all the kids or people that have been killed or hurt in traffic accidents. And I thought it was a great ceremony. It was really good. Future events coming up. Tomorrow night is a special meeting of the West Eugene Corridor Study Committee for MX. They will be having it downtown at the LTD station down there, and that's to kind of review the results of an open house they had last week to kind of start getting public input on some of the proposals. And also, LCOG will be in Florence this month on the 24th, and they'll be processing the agenda, the prosperity items that they're working on as an advocacy group, so that should be exciting. Those are all I have for now.
Thanks. George?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I'm missing my grandson's graduation this evening from Monroe Middle School. Congratulations to Kyler. The other thing, John, I've been made aware that there's quite a big parcel of land near the south of the LCC basin. There's been some preliminary talks between the property owner and our park staff. I don't know exactly how to go about to get this thing kick-started, but what this will do, it will kind of help join all the properties from the River to Ridges connection. So is there something that I need to do to say, John, go forth and look into this, evaluate it, bring it back to council if you think it's a good deal? I don't know where the funding mechanism would come from, if we have enough in the park bond measure or what, but I think this would be a very good project for us to get started on and take a look at. If we can work it out, bring it back to council for approval. I'm not quite certain what the acreage is. I know it's quite a big parcel of land, though.
I'll talk to Kurt and his staff and get further up to speed on that, and we can circle back.
Yeah, I understand that Johnny Medlin has some information on it also, so that would be kind of a good thing to do. And then, maybe report back to us, or just go ahead and look at it and evaluate it and see if we can come up with some funding mechanisms, then bring it back to us for some sort of action on that, if you could. And I was gone all last week to Arizona, and I don't mind being in the pollen capital of the world after sitting in 100-degree heat for the entire week. I left Portland a week ago Sunday. It was 48 degrees, and there was standing water on the runway at the Portland airport. I got into Phoenix 2.5 hours later. It was 103 degrees. So, we have a lot to be thankful for here in this part of the country, and it was I was glad to get back this past week and get home. So, kind of missed out on a lot of things. I guess there's a lot happening last week. So,
Always a lot happening, George.
yeah. Okay, and that's all I have.
George Brown?
Thank you. A week and a half ago, I went to a Human Rights and Equity Forum at the Baker Center. It was pretty poorly attended, unfortunately. Poor public attendance. It's too bad because there were some interesting conversations, I thought, going on. Last week, I went, after our discussion about the e-web water sale to the potential water sale to Lunita, I went to a public forum Tuesday night. And that was good because I got to hear a rehash of the whole argument for perfecting the water right and so on. And there again, there were not very many people there, but there were some very good questions asked by an attorney from the Western Department of Law Center. I think kind of furthered my knowledge a little bit anyway, so that was a good deal. And yeah, it's really nice to see the food carts down at Willamette and Broadway. And there's only 8 chairs and 2 tables, and that's not going to work because there's 5 businesses, and people are sitting on the statues, and they're just, I won't say that if we don't get some tables and chairs there, it's going to guarantee their failure, but we're certainly not helping them by not having them there. So hopefully we will be able to help them out that way with the nice weather coming up. Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Yes, I just have 2 items. I also went to the We Are Bethel celebration, and it was just every year it just gets bigger, and there's more people, more families, and more to do, and it was just, it really captures what a community is all about. And so I just wanted to thank staff for their work. It takes a lot of effort to coordinate all the exhibitors and make sure they all have tents, and printing the activities list and recruiting all the bands and entertainment. So it's really a great event for Bethel. And then I saw today in the emails that Richie Wyman is retiring on Friday, and I didn't see that coming. He's been a great employee and a great public servant. He's been very helpful to me over the years, so I wish him all the best.
Betty?
Thank you. Well, to start out, I was at First Friday Art Walk, saw the food carts, and it is impossible to find a place to sit there, so I think it's really important that we put the tables and chairs back. Of course, I've always thought we should have tables and chairs scattered around so that people can sit and talk to each other, movable things, so that they can move them and have conversation groups, but it is really important for those food carts, I think. I talked to some people, kind of on the same subject. I talked to some people hanging out in front of the courthouse and suggested that they might want to clean up the area. And they said, I need to pass this along to the county officials. They said if we'd leave a broom and a dustpan there, they would clean up. And maybe they would.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad we're going to have people working off their community service cleaning up downtown, but I've suggested for a long time that we ask young people to do that for a small amount of money, and I still think it's a good idea. I attended the meeting of the Mckenzie Watershed Council last week. They are continuing working with landowners to clean up the riverbank and to reclaim the riverbank, really, native plants and so forth, and they always have a lot of projects going. It's very interesting. Southeast Neighbors met last week, and Kevin had the people there do a miniature Envision Eugene, such as some of you spent 3 days on. Actually, an hour and a half was long enough, but I think that the meeting was well attended, and the people who were there really appreciated having a chance to express their opinions, and a number of them said that. Press Neighbors meet tomorrow night, and it's an introduction and celebration, I guess, of their history project, their neighborhood history. And it's in a rose garden at 29th and Friendly. Yes, at 7 o'clock tomorrow night. And they've been working on this for a few years, so it should be very interesting. That's all. Thank you.
I just want a quick follow-up. George made a great point that if we're going to try to invest in downtown and get activity down there, and these folks have stepped up to the plate to come and provide the food court, I think, should meet them halfway. So I don't know if that needs to be a formal request, or are you going to study it and then come back to us with a work session? I just don't think that needs...
Study kind of deal. We're actually taking a look at it. Mayor mentioned it earlier today, and so we are taking a...
Okay, thank you.
Probably a good place to play saxophone.
You can roll a piano out there.
It'll never be overtime.
Coffee can.
City manager.
We'll never have the chairs out there then.
They'll be there, but they'll be empty. Get you a pair of sunglasses.
On the Southeast Neighbors meeting, I think one of the really interesting pieces is that Steve Lee helped co-facilitate the discussion up there with Kevin Matthews as part of that Envision Eugene discussion up there. Just a couple of quick things. One is the fire department has a new recruit class that's just started last week, and so we're continuing with that. I did have a chance to attend part of the track meet this weekend, and boy, that is just such a great event that we have here, just that whole track scene, and starting to think towards 2012 and how much fun that's going to be again. So that's a great job. I know Vin and his crew and Greg Irwin and all do a great job on that. I went to the Bravo Breakfast a week ago, 2 weeks ago, which is the Arts and Business Alliance of Eugene puts that on. Betty, you were there, I know. And that's just for me, such a great effort at trying to really bring the business and art community together in some interesting ways. And then I was just going to also mention about Richie. If you have a chance, Friday at 4 o'clock at Davis's Restaurant is his retirement party, but he has just made such a huge impact, positive impact in this community. We're going to miss him a lot internally, and I think the community will miss him just from his affordable housing and homelessness issues and being such a huge advocate and helping us move forward on some things. And so he leaves a significant shoes to fill and a tremendous legacy. So I also want to just say thank you to him for his work.
John?
Andrea, sure.
Thank you. So I'm hoping, I know we're looking at, saving money and not filling some positions or changing them around. So I'm hoping that there is still a commitment on, your part to make sure that we have a Richie Wyman working on those issues. I think it's really important for somebody to have their eye on that all the time.
Absolutely. I think expressed through all of you as well as on the staff, issues of affordable housing, homelessness are top priorities. So we will make sure that we have the staff coverage and resources to continue on that mission.
Thank you for that, Andrea. I just want to wind this up by sort of appreciating what the city manager said about the track and field events this last week. I just think they're a phenomenal thing for our community and actually for me, a real demonstration of sportsmanship and great audience participation in the best sense of it, and great coaching, and really building the reputation of this community in a very positive and good way. So I just want to express my appreciation to all those who were involved with that, how important it is to our community. And because it's graduation week, and Ellen mentioned it, but I just think it is a perfect time for us to sort of recognize that we have 22,000 students here, and they play a huge role in our community. And so for all those who are graduating, we wish them all well. And of course, we have our high school graduates who are moving to the next level. So it's a pretty exciting time and an important time, and we give them all our congratulations. The next thing on our agenda today is a very important topic, one that we've been working on for a long time and have many members of our community working on for a long time, and that's the Eugene Police Department taser policy. City Manager?
Thank you, Mayor. And Tamara? And Marilyn.
Welcome.
I'll just turn the presentation over to you. How does that work?
Marilyn Nelson is a member of our commission and our use of force committee, and she's agreed to fill in for Joe Alsop, who's our chair of that committee.
We just want to welcome the Police Commission and express our appreciation, and for all other members back there and staff, thank you too. So we're glad you're here.
Thanks. I know in your packet you got a summary of the issue, and this is our second work session with this group on this topic, so I'm not going to rehash the first part of that. That was the history of tasers in our community. I hope you've either read that, although if you have any questions, be happy to answer those. I'm going to focus on what we've done since the last work session here, where the materials in your packet start with recent commission involvement. As many of you know, the Police Commission worked on this issue in its use of force subcommittee for 11 months. I've often joked that I could have had a baby by then, but now I'll say I could have had a baby in return for maternity leave by then. So it was quite a long time that the Police Commission worked on this issue. And part of the reason that it took so long is Commission members were very deliberate and thoughtful about the way they went about vetting this second round on this topic in order to balance not only the community concerns of overuse of the tool in our community, but also its value to the city and the police department as a useful tool. And so that just ended up taking quite a bit longer this time than it did the first round. And And that group completed its work and took the issue to the Police Commission in March and in April. It took 2 full commission meetings for that issue to vet. And finally completed its work in April of 2010, a couple months ago. And involved in that process was also quite a bit of community input, not only in every subcommittee meeting, which ended up being an average of about 2 a month, were there, the standard public hearing at the beginning, where public forum where folks would come up and talk, but we also had a community dialogue portion at the end of each meeting where we invited anyone in the room to come up to the table and have a dialogue back and forth. And that was how each of our meetings ended. We also had kicked off the work on that policy in June of '09 with a public forum. In the fall of 2009, the committee had dedicated one of its full meetings for public input. And then in May of this year, we also held a public forum to show the community the recommended changes. And so at each step of the way, there was opportunity for input, and the group was able to hear from the public on those topics. And so Marilyn is going to walk you through the proposed changes for the policy as forwarded by the Police Commission to Chief Jones.
Thank you, Tamara. I did have the honor and pleasure of serving on the Use of Force Committee that worked on, for so many months, the TASER policy guidelines recommended to the chief. And if I can beg your indulgence, I would like to focus on all the sections that had relatively minor changes first, and then finish up taking a closer look at Section 309.4, which is the meat of the policy and deals with the authorized use and the thresholds that we're recommending. So first off, I do see that you have both a full copy in your packets as well as a redlined copy. So as you may have questions, you can
Which one are you using?
I'm personally using the redlined copy. First of all, with Section 309.1, dealing with purpose and scope, what the Commission is recommending there is the addition of some definitions, which you will see the AFID, which are the little paper identification tags that TASER ejects, to clarify that the use could be both a discharge or a drive stun or a display, and what each of those means.
Page 9.
Section 309.2, an addition was made there to speak to removing non-functioning equipment and dealing with biannual checks of equipment. Very simple. 309.3, dealing with verbal and visual warnings. That seems to be working very well from the language that was in the pilot project. And so that with just some minor changes and clarifications, that is being forwarded pretty much as written. 309.4, I'll be going through in more detail later. So moving forward to 309.5, this section was renamed Aftercare. It had been previously titled Medical Treatment. And in this, the committee is recommending that EMS be summoned in each instance, and this is a change from previously when there had been a list of specific instances when EMS would be called. There's also language added that allows people to choose if they would like probes to be removed by medical professionals. A warning to officers has been added to use restraint techniques post-taser use that would not impair respiration. And it also calls for any person who's been tased to be medically assessed prior to being booked into corrections. So those were the changes made to that section. 309.6. Actions following discharge. It clarifies that if a person does not consent to photographs of sensitive areas, that the police honor that request and document the refusal in a police report. This was a specific change made after public comment was received. 309.7, review of taser use, actually broadens the review, calling for the taser report to go to the watch commander and then to the defensive tactics coordinator, and then it is forwarded to the involved officer's division manager. Previously, it had only gone to up the officer's chain of command to the lieutenant. And the training section, 309.8, we specify that it now requires an annual recertification with some specific points to be covered, including a review of the taser policy, review of the use of force policy, which is kind of the umbrella that talks about the totality of the circumstances and the philosophy around use of force. It also calls for training to review the target area considerations, and this is basically the manufacturer's recommendation to reduce intentional application of probes near head, neck, chest, and groin. And probably most importantly, the committee was very clear in its desire to add to the training de-escalation techniques. So as I said, those are the relatively minor, although they took an incredible amount of time, changes to the rest of the policy. But coming back now to 309.4, as I said before, this is the meat of the policy and what we spent the most time on. And I would like to share that it was our intent to develop threshold statements that were just a step below what is considered the threshold for use of lethal force. And to speak to that, the threshold for use of lethal force involves three elements. It involves an immediate threat, a credible threat, and the threat of serious physical injury. And the term serious physical injury is defined in statute as physical injury which creates a substantial risk of death or which causes serious and protracted disfigurement, protracted impairment of health, or protracted loss of impairment of the function of any bodily organ. And this is a phrase that officers are very familiar with. As I said before, it is in statute and is part of their use of force training. So when the committee was looking at what language to come up with, looking at those three elements.
Casinos doing a lottery with these businessmen and corporations on whether they can watch the line in the little arena. I've got two red caps following me up here right now, following me all the way here. They'll follow me around all day, so I lose my cigarettes, they'll push. Oh, no, you're not allowed to go here, now you go there. Chief. The war is with us now. Right here.
Thank you, Chief Kearns.
Go ahead, please.
So of those three elements, clearly our interest is in that any threat be credible. And so that was not an element that we felt that we could change. However, we could look at whether or not a threat was immediate and the level of physical injury. So the first threshold is in 309.4.1, sub A, sub 1. And I will read here. A person who, by his or her words or conduct, the officer reasonably creates a credible threat, the word immediate was omitted, from this subsection, coupled with the means and ability to carry out the threat of serious physical injury to the person, himself, herself, the officer, or another person. From the original pilot project language, the level of injury was elevated to that of serious physical injury, but the word immediate was removed from this subsection. So in other words, this section has the element of credibility and serious physical injury. So it has those two of the three elements of the lethal threshold. An example would be an officer responding to an armed robber enters a room and the suspect is within a step or two of a knife on a table. It is not immediate because he doesn't have a weapon in hand, but it is credible and it would result in serious physical injury. So that is an example of that threshold. Okay, then we looked at, okay, if we had an immediate threat and a credible threat, we could look at the level of physical injury. So sub 2 reads, a person who, by his or her words or conduct, the officer reasonably believes creates an immediate, credible threat, coupled with the means and ability to carry out the threat of physical injury, not serious physical injury, to the person himself or herself, the officer or another person, and who engages in active physical resistance to a lawful police action. So in this instance, an example would be an officer arrives at the scene where someone is beating up on another person. It doesn't rise to the level of serious physical injury. I mean, if we were being beaten up, we would think that, but legally it doesn't reach that threshold. It is immediate, it's credible, it's happening now. The officer tells the person to stop, gives the person a chance to comply. They don't comply. So that is an example of that kind of a situation. The third threshold deals with people fleeing from arrest. And the original language was much broader in that it involved anyone who would be fleeing from arrest for any kind of an offense. And the committee felt that, for example, if someone had been shoplifting, we didn't feel that the community had a value for an officer to tase someone in that situation. And so we worked to develop a list of some things that we felt that the community would support in these situations if someone was running away, that an officer might tase them. And that would be if the offense was a felony, or if it was a misdemeanor involving injury or threat of injury to a person, a sex crime or violation of a court protective order, such as a restraining or a stalking protective order. So in those instances, the committee felt a taser use would be justified. And the fourth threshold is if the person was assaulting or attempting to assault a public safety officer. And this came actually from police staff expressing concern about if an officer was to be ambushed, they would not have an opportunity to give someone a warning, tell them to stop or whatever, because they wouldn't know what was coming to hit them. And in that case, we felt it was justified. And in all of these four situations, if you go to the top of the page, the introductory under sub A, all of these circumstances need to be weighed given the officer's considerations of the severity of the offense, the degree of threat the person poses, the person's history of violent behavior, and what other options, including de-escalation, are available to apprehend the person, as well as any other relevant circumstances to determine whether the discharge of a taser is reasonable for the situation. In other words, the totality of the circumstances. Also authorized, or actually consideration that we put in sub B is when there are a large number of people that officers should consider whether the use of a taser may escalate the situation. This isn't saying, and I know there's some variance of opinion on the commission on this point, but again, it is just a consideration for officers to be thinking about. And lastly, in this section, dealing with juveniles, that the term arrest would apply in certain circumstances when a juvenile is being taken into custody. So 309.4.2 deals with restrictions. And we recommended taking out the language in sub B about the taser not being used at demonstrations or protests without authorization of the police chief, because we felt it was covered more in new language that we added as C, which is that taser shall not be discharged at a demonstration or other event for crowd control purposes. So only in the event of an offense being committed would a taser be used. In D, we clarified the situations when a taser would be used against a handcuffed or secured person. Basically, only when they were overly assaultive, self-destructive, or violently restricted, resistive behavior, and only when other less intrusive and readily means options aren't available to deal with the situation. So it's just basically a clarification. In section E, the symptoms of what is termed excited delirium was moved to the aftercare section because it's more related with medical follow-up. The language in F was just one word was changed. In G, the target area was clarified based on the manufacturer's recommendations. And in the last part there, we added that the taser shall not be used punitively to elicit statements or to harass or inflict undue pain on any individual. In 309.4.3, dealing with multiple discharges, it had not been the knowledge of the committee that when the pilot language was developed, there is normally a 5-second cycle when a taser is activated, but if an officer holds the trigger, it can be longer than that. And so we wanted to make sure that while the language states that a standard discharge is 5 seconds in duration, that down in the 4th paragraph, the number of taser discharges should not exceed 3 or a total duration of 15 seconds. So either 3 discharges or 15 seconds, to clarify that. Minor changes to 309.4.4, report of use. And 309.4.5, we did add language that would allow an officer to switch the safety off and engage the taser cam, the video camera on the taser, in situations where the officer believes that an audio or video recording would be helpful to document the situation. But that does require a balance of the risk for accidental activation versus the benefit of having the recording. And minor changes to 309.4.6, .7, and .8.
Thank you. So, thank you, Marilyn, for walking us through those, the changes, the highlights of the policy. At this time, I'd like to indulge any questions by the council.
So I sort of look at this as our opportunity to look at all the hard work that's been done by the commission and to give any additional advice or comments that we want to the chief. So using what the hard work that they've done and our council's sort of responsibility, because this is such an important topic to us and to our community. So I would like to give Mike and George the first opportunity to comment on this because they both serve on the police commission. So, George?
Thank you. Thanks a lot, you guys, for all the hard work. I went to some of those meetings. I don't know. I mean, it's not perfect. I think it's an improvement over the last. I don't know that it could ever be perfect. I'm still a little concerned about 309.4 sub 1 and sub 2. It seems like it's a little complicated. I guess the officers can understand it, but I think somebody just kind of dropping in from Mars and opening up the page to this reads those two things and they go, what's the difference? What? You've explained it very well, but I'm assuming that the training would, taser training would do the same thing. I've been looking lately at Denver's policy, and it seems like it seems a little clearer to me. I know you guys maybe looked at that. You looked at so many things. You looked at an enormous amount of material. Also, I thought that their no use list was a lot clearer and simpler than ours too. I would kind of like, if I was going to, I mean, I don't really want to make you go back and do 10 more months' work, but if we were going to change anything at all, I think we could maybe add back the word physical to number 2, and somehow maybe combine those two, or maybe eliminate one and add physical back in. Might be an improvement, but I mean, it's definitely, it's better than what we prepared before. And I'm just wondering if it really kind of narrows it down, because you're right, the community does want the use to be really clear. I mean, as clear as we can get it for the officers, for their safety, and so that bad accidents don't happen and misuse happen. So I think I'll just wait to comment later. Thank you. Thanks again, guys.
Mike?
I also wanted to say thank you for all the hard work. The subcommittee, as Tamara mentioned, worked on this for 11 months plus before it came before the full committee, and then went through again through what the subcommittee had put forward for another 2 months. So we really had kind of 2 rounds of reviewing this whole thing in the police commission, one at the subcommittee level and then at the full committee level, before coming forward with this. There were a lot of different people who were involved in the process, and as you heard, they got a lot of public input. There were public forums involved in this as well that everybody was sensitive to. And several of the subcommittee members were also people who served, for example, on the PAYORC committee as well, so are extremely well versed in the community's sensitivity to police work. I would say that from my standpoint, the issue of 302.4 sub A.2, for me, the importance of deleting the word physical there is because the chief ran through several sorts of questions from the committee about what sorts of situations would we understand this policy to apply to, what sort of potential hypothetical situations. And one of them that we talked about, for example, was someone standing with a knife. And when the officer says, please drop the knife or put the knife down, and the person doesn't, if they refuse to comply, but they take no active physical steps forward, they simply freeze and hold the knife and refuse to comply, that person then would not be subject to the way it was written before, because they were making no physical movement, but they were still an immediate threat. And so that's why I think the great majority, as I recall, of the committee in full voted to remove the word physical, because it wasn't as complete an opportunity to do the community standard based on the everyday sort of occurrences the police would see. So this was a little bit more reflected at the community standard. I also had some challenges with another part of it, and the chief's fully aware of my challenge with this as we spoke about it earlier, but the part down in 4 there where it asks that they consider other options. It is wise and intelligent to consider the full totality of the circumstances in each and every case. But to make a specific request that they consider other options was, for me, a challenge, because there was a great deal of work done to establish what the use of force standard was in our community, that it was all necessary force as opposed to least necessary force. And there's kind of a difference there, and I'm going to run out of time, so I guess I'll need another round to finish.
Before Chris is in the queue, and Andrea's in the queue. Before I go to that, I actually asked our police auditor to come and give us his take, and so I'd like for you to have a chance to listen to him before we have further council talk. So, Mark, you want to come up and...
Thank you. Good evening. I looked at it from the standards of evaluation, excuse me, of the auditor. And last week I happened to be in Canada and spent a lot of time with Art Bertlieb, who was the chief counsel for Justice Braidwood and his commission. And I think Art did most of the work, so I spent a lot of time with him, too. For those of you who read that 454-page report, was it, George?
About 550.
550? I lost count. So I did. So we had a good discussion. As you know, one of my primary responsibilities is to evaluate the conduct based on policies and procedures. So the first question I asked myself was, do I think that the policy is understandable to the officers? And I think with the proper training, which is a key component in this, I do believe that it is understandable to officers. The next question I asked myself was whether I'm able to evaluate conduct, to effectively evaluate their conduct using this policy. And the answer to that question is yes. And then the third question I asked myself was whether the policy is consistent with national standards. And it is. If I may, just on a few things, of course, and as I said, the key component is the training, including involving the mentally ill. My first taser case was in 1987, and it involved a mentally ill individual who did not respond well to the taser and ended up getting shot 22 times. So I'm hopeful that that's a major consideration in the training process. Another issue, having looked at things, is I noted that it was a biannual testing of the device, and I would recommend an annual testing of the device because, I think that the most recent Institute of Justice study also recommends an annual testing of the device because there are inconsistencies at times. I think that's on like page 2. The other issues I think are addressed for those of you that did read reports. Oftentimes the deaths that occur, whether from a contributing standpoint or a primary standpoint, involve usage that is longer than 5 seconds. I believe the one in Canada was at least 37 seconds. And the other thing, and in particular in my discussions with Art, involved the thorough and accurate reporting by both officers and the supervisors. That was one of the critical blows to that incident with the RCMP because there was not accurate reporting, and when the cell phone videos came out that were different from the reporting, then I think that action was going to fail because of those issues. So I would only ask that we get thorough and accurate reporting, which is mentioned here, but I just wanted to reemphasize that. And of course, I've always, for those, especially, and the chief knows it because I've been around enough of those situations, on the aftercare issue is very, very important. And I've always been very strong advocate of that in a lot of the things that are being done. Otherwise, I think it's workable for the officers, it's workable for the auditor.
Thank you for that, Mark. Okay, Chris, you're next.
Thank you. I appreciate all the work. This is a difficult issue because you're trying to define the rules of engagement for the worst case situations, not the best. I mean, if we were sitting at home watching TV, you wouldn't need a policy around that. This is often the worst situations people get into, and to try to create rules of engagement around that is by its very nature a challenge. And trying to achieve the best possible outcome, which is a least damaging resolution to the situation. You can't leave the situation going on. It has to be resolved one way or the other. And trying to come up with a workable way to resolve it, I think, is what everybody wants to get to. People will differ on what's a workable solution or what is the actual solution, but I think this is trying to get at what is, by most people's definition, a workable solution. It doesn't have everything that everybody would want to have in it, but I think it is threading a very difficult situation in the best possible way. That's really why I'm thankful for all the work you did. It does take this much time to put something like this together. I want something that is and respectful really is a hard word to use in this situation, but it's the only word that I think really fits part of that resolution you're trying to achieve. It's as respectful as you can be to both sides of the equation. I don't want anything that's going to put an officer in unnecessary risk. They're already at enough risk. You don't want to create more risk than necessary. I think no one in this room wants to ever think that a taser would be used arbitrarily, or casually or without real good justification, and that's why we're trying to create these rules of engagement that we can control, so no one would go, oh, this is just being arbitrarily and frivolously used. That might have been the case back in the days when folks would just shoot you if they felt like it, and we've gotten past those days, and hopefully we can do the same here. I want a policy that is as useful to the officers as it is also useful to potential perpetrators. And I know that's an extraordinarily hard thing to do. So I'm taking the long way to just say I'm really grateful that you worked on this as hard as you did. I think for now it's a workable policy, and we need to try to give it our greatest support to see if we can't get to that positive resolution.
Andrea?
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to thank the committee. I know you guys did a lot of work. I went to quite a few of the meetings. And I just really felt like there was a lot of good conversation. So I really do appreciate the process that you guys went through. And even though it was laborious for you, Tamara, I'm really glad that you were there and that you did the work. And I really liked the comments that people made. It was really interesting to hear in some of the statements that some of the committee members made. And the conversations, I think that to me is why we asked the Police Commission to look at this, not only to come up with the policy, but actually to take a really good look at it. And just the comments were really pretty interesting, that, people's opinions of how these should be used and who should be tested and who should try it. And it was just really good. So I'm really glad that you guys did this work, and hopefully, the chief can, use this policy. Because that's kind of the ultimate goal of this, in my opinion. The differences of how the different policies is all to be, it's different from city to city and whatever that community is. And I'm glad that Mark had a chance to articulate that he thought this was a working policy. That's good.
Betty?
Okay, first, I think it's up to the council to decide whether this policy is adopted or not, since it is policy, and we're the policy-making body. And John, what is your opinion of that? Is this just, are we just adopting this now? I know it wasn't listed as an action item.
Right. What we're wanting is feedback from the city council. I do believe that it is within the police chief's purview to figure out how to use any tools that we have in a police department, and I think this is one of those.
But the council could decide not to have this as a tool, is that right?
That's correct. I think one of the policies that the council could do is to say we do not want to have tasers in our inventory, and then if the council chooses to do that, of course, then we wouldn't have tasers.
We could decide to have a moratorium until we get more public involvement.
I think you could probably make that kind of a motion if the council moved that.
Mm-hmm.
I would sure take that as guidance.
Oh, good. I strongly think that we should be the ones who adopt a policy, because it affects all sorts of people. It could affect any of us. I'd like to know how many times the taser was used during the last year.
For that, I would have to ask Chief Kern.
Maryland.
Oh, Maryland. 49, okay. I think we have it.
49.
But Maryland has the
Yeah, but I want
statistics from January to present, which aren't in there.
Maryland's going to tell us.
I do. Thank you to staff. So between January 2008 and December 31st, 2009, in the AIS, there were 49 incidents where a taser was activated. That's over a 2-year period. And since January 1st of this year, there were 10 activations actually in 9 incidents. There was one incident where it was activated both in drive stun and the probes.
Okay, the reason I want that brought out is, would a gun have, how many of those times would a gun have been used if they didn't have tasers? Do you have any information about that?
In the pilot project, it was 6 times, and I don't know since January if we have that.
I don't know
information.
since
So in
January.
the first pilot portion where there were 49 activations, it was 6 times where deadly force could have been used.
But would have been if they hadn't had tasers?
Correct.
I don't recall very many times when guns have been used in Eugene against perpetrators. Do you know? I know of one. We all know of one.
I don't know. Do you have any of those?
So what I'm getting at, I see the only...
Steve may be able to address your question.
Counselor, we don't have good figures on all the times when deadly force would have been authorized, but frequently during the course of a year, officers are involved in incidents where they could have used deadly force. And just in the last few months, there's been several. During the interesting thing about the pilot project is it gave us an opportunity to highlight how many times in that year, in that 18-month period, officers could have used deadly force, but instead were able to use a taser.
But I'm thinking they probably would not have used deadly force, and that the taser can be deadly force. It's I think it's described as less lethal, but it's still lethal. In any of these cases, if they didn't have tasers, what would have happened? How would the situation have been different? Do you know? Have any ideas? Any of the times they were used, if the officers had not had tasers, how would the situation have been different? What would have happened differently?
Well, the officers would have had to use another type of force. And what we know from the studies that have been conducted over the last 4 or 5 years, that more likely than not, or more likely than in those cases where a taser is used, someone would have been injured. The officer in 40% more of cases, and the subject 60% more.
But they were injured if they were tasered, weren't they?
Well, injuries are defined as something more than the puncture wound from
I see. And could you tell me what de-escalation techniques are?
There are, we teach crisis intervention training, which is a large part awareness training, but it also teaches officers techniques to calmly work with someone to get them to the point where they can comply with what the officer needs to accomplish in whatever the situation is.
No.
That's the crisis intervention training.
Yeah, I understand that, but this was listed as one of the things after the taser, de-escalation.
And then there are a number of products on the market, educational products on the market, that teach officers de-escalation techniques, and they're verbal techniques which allow an officer to come to an agreement with a subject who isn't cooperating with whatever the direction is the officer needs, whether the subject needs to be taken into custody or moved from property or whatever the encounter happens to involve.
Well, as I read it, it was de-escalation after the person has been tasered.
No. This is these are training strategies intended to reduce the need to use force.
Okay, I've lost the place now, but it was listed as an after thing, I thought.
And at the end of the recommended policy is some training that the Police Commission suggests each officer receive before they're issued a taser. And that would include the crisis intervention training and de-escalation training.
Okay, in my opinion, I know a lot of people in the community are interested, and I realize that Police Commission was open to comments, but it's not the same as having a council hearing. I think there should be a council public hearing, and then the council should decide whether we want to recommend adoption of the policy. Thank you.
I've got Alan and George pulling the queue before I call on them. One of the things that I've sort of learned through listening to various people through this discussion, my original position was using tasers in lieu of using a lethal weapon. So you're using a less lethal weapon instead of the most lethal weapon. But in conversation, what I've learned is that there are situations that are much more desirable than that. That is, that before you get to the point of it becoming necessary, that you might employ a taser so you don't get to the place of having to use a lethal weapon. So it's just, as you talked about earlier, it's a step before that. That's basically a judgment call, and that's just the way that is, but I can understand that, because your goal is to not get to the place where you're going to have to hurt someone. So see something coming and do something about it ahead of time. All right, Alan, you're next.
Tamara and Marilyn, thank you for all your hours of hard work on this. I know it was quite a long time and a lot of hours, and as Councilor Ortiz already talked about, to me, this is kind of the balancing between keeping officers out of harm's way, because we certainly don't want to see any officers get hurt, and balancing that with having a clear policy that protects citizens and prevents abuse. So that's what this is for. I found the minority report very helpful in the comments that individual commissioners made. As to whether or not this is in our purview, I always apply the Ken Tolinar rule. Ken Tolinar is a friend of mine who worked at Bureau of Governmental Research and actually helped write the model code. And I once asked him, what's the difference between management and policy calls? And he said, if it's controversial, it's policy. And so this is clearly controversial, and I think clearly within the realm of the council. Originally, I was where the mayor was, and I thought the taser policy was to avoid lethal force, especially after that unfortunate incident where a mentally ill young man was killed. But my thinking and learning has evolved since, and so that makes this policy that much more important. And with that, I have a whole slew of questions. I'm going to need a second round. I'll start with since you went backwards, I'll go backwards too. So back in 3.096, you made a change in the last paragraph. At least 3 of the AFIDs from each cartridge will be collected, and you changed it to should be collected.
That may not always be possible, depending on where the location of the taser discharge. For example, if it's in a rocky area, the officer may not be able to collect those, or if it's in, there's water nearby or something of that nature. So instead of requiring that, we said they should collect them. There may be circumstances that prevent them from doing that.
So did you explore language like, if practical, they will be collected?
Every effort.
I don't think there was a great deal of discussion around that item.
No, there wasn't.
On 3.095, the aftercare, it says that EMS will be summoned to examine individuals, but it doesn't say when it's clear when, and it's unclear to me when the summoning would occur. I think one of the things that we want to have is, as the police auditor mentioned, is a workable policy that's understandable by officers. And this, I don't know that this gives clear direction to officers about when they're supposed to summon the EMS. Did you guys have that conversation?
That would be more appropriately answered by the chief. I can't speak to that. I'm thinking that it's going to depend on the circumstances of the individual incident, whether the person's under control or not. I'll let the chief address that.
Our practice has been, and this is consistent with this policy, that we summon EMS immediately after the taser's been used. And our emergency medical services needs to be able to use some judgment in when they respond, because it's not considered a medical emergency that the taser's been applied to someone.
Okay. I found it interesting in the minority reports a discussion about the training and whether or not officers should be tased as part of their training. The people that thought that they should felt like then they could really clearly understand what it's like to be tased and could understand it, and other ones felt like it was putting officers in harm's way, which I guess is kind of the point. If you're going to use it, you need to understand it. But in the end, the training doesn't require officers to be tased. But there seems to be a pretty big minority opinion about that on the commission.
I think it was viewed to be a liability issue for the state. But
It's going to stay right up there.
Pull the chair up? Sure. Would you like me to sit?
Yes, please. Yeah, I think it'd be easier.
Police departments are all over the board with whether or not they require officers to be subjected to tasers, and I've decided to not go that way. We can provide them with all the training they need to use this thing properly and effectively, safely, humanely, without subjecting them to a taser. We don't require that they're struck by batons or other less lethal weapons that we use either. So that's why I've decided not to go that way.
Well, shooting them is kind of a silly example because you could kill someone. But I suppose you could kill someone with a taser, too. I guess that's the whole point. I'll need another round.
Okay. George Polling.
Well, just to follow up on that, Alan, there are different types of defensive weapons that officers can use that they never actually get struck by it, such as the baton. I mean, there's padding that the officers wear when they go through baton training. There's also a different composition of the baton, too. So I'm glad the chief finally took a chair at the table, because I'd like to hear his opinion of this.
Sure. I think this is a good policy. I'm comfortable with the thresholds that the Police Commission is recommending because they're consistent with what's being used around the country. We have a high standard in our police department here that we treat all people humanely, and this policy permits us to do that while reducing injuries to subjects and to officers. The greatest benefit of the taser is that it reduces the likelihood that police have to use deadly force to some degree, and the studies have shown that the other benefit is that it reduces by 40% injuries to subjects and 60% injuries to officers, and those are worthwhile things to do, and those outcomes happen with policies that are written like this one. So I think the thresholds are good, and the standards that the Police Commission is recommending will be helpful.
Okay. And then go back to 309.2 on the proper functioning, testing for proper functioning. Mr. Gissner said annually. I would like to see that semi-annually, just to make sure that the equipment is functioning properly, especially in the inclement weather that we face here, that you never know what's going to happen on that. And I'm glad to see the aftercare medical treatment, the training in there. All this is just kind of common sense stuff that would be, I'm sure, been taking place anyway. There is one area that I'm concerned with, and I'd like to know, Chris was talking about unnecessary risk. I would like to know the reasoning for taking out the first part of 309.4.1, I guess it's now A3, versus a person, and then what's been, that whole section that was taken out. What's the reasoning on taking that out? If you have, it says a person who has been placed under arrest or is so advised but engages in active physical resistance exceeding officer's ability to control him or her using strength or control holds. A taser may be used to gain control of such a person in lieu of engaging in a struggle with him or her that would risk greater injury to the subject or officers than use of the taser. Why was that taken out?
Well, I think I can respond to that. The simple answer was that we felt that sub 2 already covered it, already covered those situations.
And that's the paragraph right before it?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, because the next paragraph, or the next part below that, is a person who flees from arrest. To me, if you're resisting arrest, and you're more likely as an officer to get injured during a resisting of arrest than somebody fleeing from arrest. I personally would like to see that put back in there. We owe it to our officers and their families to give them every tool possible to come home safely at night. I just think that we need to make sure that our officers are trained and equipped properly and trained properly. And I just would like to see that in there, because that, to me, clarifies a little bit more. I don't want an officer out there trying to second guess, well, is this right or not? Is he struggling with me? Does this fall under this or under that? I told him he's under arrest. It's pretty clear and obvious. I think that should be put back in.
I've got second round. I've got Mike and Alan and Andrea. I just want to ask this question. You tried to explain it to me. There were the 3 criteria, and for some reason immediate got removed, and I don't really understand why immediate got removed.
Okay, of the three criteria, immediate, credible, and the level of injury.
Right.
Credible was not one that we felt we could adjust. It needed to be credible in all situations. But we could adjust whether or not it was immediate. And so the first threshold, we removed that word. And in the second threshold, we kept immediate, and then we adjusted the level of injury. And so we were adjusting those two variables.
If you have immediate, credible threat of serious physical injury, that's a deadly force situation. So to remove the word immediate, put it just below deadly force.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Kind of. All right. Mike, you're next.
Thank you. I wanted to say overall here that I think that all the work that was done on this, and it was excruciatingly long conversations, was about giving the officers the greatest level of specificity here. And I think what we did was come up with a clearer policy than was there before that gives them greater level of understanding of what the community's expectation is before discharging a taser. And George, I share your concern as well with the safety of officers. We don't have enough officers on duty, and there are enough of them out with injury right now that we don't need to add to that unnecessarily. And I think this is a policy that can help address that. And for me, the reason I was willing to, I had the same concern you did about sub 3, but the part in 2 that talks about if they're resisting covers all of those grounds, and so I was at least comfortable with that. But I wanted to go back to the part that did concern me a little, where we're talking about proactively putting in the language about ensuring that the police officer considers all options. And again, I think it's extremely wise to consider all options in the totality of the circumstances in each and every individual case. However, I believe this goes at least a little ways towards watering down the use of force standard. And I don't know that, I don't consider that that was done intentionally. But in our community, we had a very long conversation at at Police Commission previously about the use of force standard, that it's not the least force necessary, but that it is all necessary force. And I think it was the chief that brought up an example once that I don't remember for sure, but I thought it was a good one that was brought up, that if your house is on fire and you call for the fire department to show up, you don't want them to use the least water necessary. You want them to use all necessary water to put out the fire. And in similar circumstances, if someone is holding one of your family members in harm's way, you don't want the officers that respond to use the least force necessary in that case. You want them to use all force necessary. And so that standard was something that was debated for a very long period of time and set as community standard. My concern is that in some cases this sort of language about asking them to do this waters down the use of force standard to a degree that could put officers in danger and to put members of the community in danger. And so I was for removing that particular piece, but the rest of the committee was not. And that's all I needed to say on that.
Okay, there, Alan, then Andrea, then Chris. Alan?
So, piggybacking on what the mayor said, it used to say creates an immediate credible threat, and now it just says a credible threat. So I'm concerned about the deletion of the word immediate. I think it's a good add to say serious. It used to say to the safe. It just used to say safety, physical safety, and now it says serious physical injury, and I think that's a good change. But I'm curious about, other than what you said, Tamara, give me an example of where an immediate threat would use lethal force and a credible threat, you would use a taser. I mean,
Would you like me
or
to
chief, yeah,
cover that?
sure. Or
Shoot. Is that what you said?
Go ahead,
I may have
Chief.
misunderstood, Counselor.
Take your best shot.
Okay. A typical scenario is one where we're dispatched to a case of domestic violence in a house. And person on the phone says, I'm frightened because they've got a gun and I think they're going to kill me. when the police officers show up and no one is in the house except the suspect, they might talk to the suspect at the front door who's unarmed or appears to be unarmed. The suspect will be upset with the police officer and say, look, I'm going to go inside, get my gun, and come out here and shoot you. That is a credible threat. It's not immediate because he doesn't have a gun in his hand, but it is credible. So the officer could, in that case, under this policy, use the taser to stop the person, take him into custody. In the same scenario, if the person showed up at the front door with a gun in their hand and said, I'm going to shoot you, then they have an immediate, credible threat and the ability to carry that out. So those are the two scenarios. And I believe the Police Commission chose to drop the word immediate so that officers could prevent a deadly encounter from occurring.
And my next question was about why does it say words or conduct, but you answered that question with your example, I think, as well. The next question I have is still in that same section, point 309.4.1A2, still in that section. It's used to say engages in aggressive physical resistance, and now it just says engages in active resistance. So we've deleted the words aggressive and physical and replaced it with active resistance. And that seems like a lower threshold to me.
It probably reads like a lower threshold, but it isn't. Active resistance is a term that we're familiar with, and it'll be defined in Policy 300, but it's certainly defined by DPSST. It's the lowest level of active resistance is one where a subject physically powers through a control hold. So if an officer goes to arrest someone and they say, no, I'm not going, and they don't comply, that would be passive resistance. If the officer takes a hold of the person's arms and they make their arms rigid and they don't move them behind their back, that's static resistance. That still isn't high enough. That doesn't meet the threshold. But if the person wrestles and tries to pull away or power through the officer's hold, that is active resistance. And that would then meet the threshold in policy.
What kind of verbal resistance would justify use?
I don't believe this recommendation.
Well, isn't two, it's an and statement, right? So it's person who words or conduct creates an immediate credible threat and who engages in aggressive physical resistance.
It requires that active resistance. The word and requires that as well.
Okay. So in one, immediate was taken out, but in two, immediate's still there, if my...
That's right.
Explain that one to me, please. Why was that? Why did you do that?
Would you like me to answer that?
Go ahead. Good.
Well, the Police Commission felt that because the threat is lower in that paragraph, physical injury, that the standard should be higher. It should be an immediate threat of physical injury, immediate credible threat of physical injury.
Oh, because it's... Not sure I understand that completely, Chief.
Well, serious injury is the definition is tidy, but the reality of serious injury is very messy. It's not, a serious injury is protracted disfigurement, which isn't a lost tooth or a broken nose. It's a permanent disfiguring change to the human condition. Losing an arm would be serious physical injury. Something that could potentially lead immediately to death is serious physical injury. Losing the loss of an organ like your liver or kidney or something like that is serious physical injury, which is why, so that an officer wouldn't have to use deadly force, it doesn't need to be an immediate threat. It can be that credible threat that would allow him to intervene with a taser before having to use deadly force. When the threat is only physical injury, which would be the kind of threat that could lead to a broken nose or a lost tooth, then the standard is that there be an immediate, credible threat that those things could happen to somebody. The officer warns them to stop and then could use the taser if they choose not to.
So one is a credible threat of serious physical injury, and two is immediate credible threat of physical injury.
That's right.
And active resistance.
That's right.
Yeah.
So they are a different standard.
That's right.
Okay. And in D, there are several items listed here. Injury or threat of injury to your person, a sex crime in violation of ORS, blah, 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 and violation of a court protective order. Why just those two of all the different types of potential felonies or misdemeanors? Why did those two rise to get put in here?
Well, the police commission felt that previously it didn't specify felony or misdemeanor. This section of the policy didn't.
Right.
And we felt that that was fine in a felony situation, but in the course of discussion, it came up about shoplifting. Shoplifting
Right.
came up, and it came to our attention that if we didn't delineate the types of misdemeanors that a taser could be used in, that it potentially could be used in a situation where there was a suspect that shoplifted and fled the scene, and then a taser could potentially be used on that person. And the police commission felt very strongly, pretty unanimously, that that would not be a situation that would the community would be okay with. It was the community values piece in that. So that's why we delineated the most serious misdemeanors and felt that it would be fine for it to be used in these types of situations with these types of crimes.
All right. Yeah, now I can see this little tiny comma
Alan, you
there.
want another round?
Yeah. Yes. Just let me finish that thought. I can see that little tiny comma. So those are misdemeanors.
Yep.
Yes.
That's right.
Okay, Andrea, you're next. Before you start, I just want to, I think it's obvious to everybody when all the planning people got up and walked out that we're not doing Envision Eugene discussion because this merits us getting to so, sorry for anybody who came for that or was expecting that, but it's not going to be covered in this session tonight. We'll reschedule it. So, with that, Andrea.
So I don't really have any more questions about the policy, but I just kind of want to speak to some of the stuff that I've heard. I agree. This is about safety first, and I appreciate all the comments that people are, and all the work that was, the thoughts that went into, having the officers trained. But I can tell you just from my experience in the years of the ER that I've actually witnessed some of them in situations where a taser probably would have been easier to deal with when we have people who are out of control and you need multiple manpower. There are some pretty big, strong young people who have mental health crises, and there's really no way other than physical brute strength to get folks under control, to give them medication that will make their lives better for them for the moment. And so, I just think that, we talk about safety first, and I think about all the folks that I've seen come through the doors for injuries of different kinds, and I do think that this could be a tool that would be useful in situations like that. And that's exactly what I view this as. It's a tool for people to do their work. And just kind of responding to Betty, I don't really know that I would want to weigh in on whether or not we would use this tool, tell the officers to use this tool or not, any more than and I've said this before, to tell Kurt what size tires to buy for Public Works, because I kind of expect those managers to have the ideas of what's best for their departments, and I have faith in that, and if we don't like it, we can tell John. And I don't know that we would, talk about the tires that Public Works uses. We have policies that we want them to be energy efficient, so I don't want him to get big old 4x4 trucks when it's unnecessary, when he can use an electric car. So, that's the kind of stuff that I just kind of don't think that we need to go down that road. And the last thing of all, this really is up to the chief. In my opinion, he's the one who John has hired to do the job of being the chief of police. And so I respect both John and Chief Kearns, and so I would hope that however this policy gets to chief, that he would, takes into consideration all the work that the commission has done.
Okay, Chris and Betty, and then George Brown. Chris?
Thank you. A lot of this, for me, swirls around the notion of when an officer has the judgment or the authority to be preemptive in the use of a taser. I mean, if somebody's shooting at me, that's a pretty clear situation that, there's a threat and it's going on and bullets are whizzing by. But where's that point where, You decide that there's sufficient danger that it warrants it, where I don't. That's the preemptive nature. We're always debating what's preemptive. And I think we're trying to figure out a way to just zero in and provide some guidelines in terms of what a reasonable person would consider the situation where preemptively using it would be okay. And I know different people are going to have different comfort levels for where that preemptive level is. To me, the circular conversation is, well, I would be perfectly comfortable with it, but you're not. So does that mean you get to use a taser just because you feel threatened? If I'm sitting this far away with a knife, are you more threatened than I was sitting where Mike is with a knife?
Yes.
When do we use the taser? And it's almost like trying to define the undefinable or anticipate the unanticipatable. That's why I really am impressed by the amount of work you put into this, because you're trying to get close to defining that undefinable, but you can't restrict an officer to the point where they're in that situation, somebody's there, is it or is it not a threat? They've got to use their judgment, and we have to ultimately say, they're in the situation, they're having to use their judgment. We gave them as much of this guideline as we can, but ultimately they have to make the decision. That's the leap we have to make. We can't define this down to, you're going to understand it absolutely in every circumstance. At some point, they're going to have to exercise judgment and decide whether they should act preemptively or not. I mean, to me, that's where this really boils down to. What's that threshold? This gets us closer. It may not ultimately be close. We may still have to tweak it some more, but I think it's a real step towards trying to define the undefinable or anticipate the unanticipatable.
Betty.
Thank you. I have a question for the chief. If this policy, as recommended, had been in effect, would there have been different outcomes from any situations?
I don't know the answer to that question necessarily.
Take some of the ones that everybody has been interested in.
I think the most important thing to know is that this taser policy sets a high standard for its use because it is a significant use of force. But this is only part of what's going to reduce the likelihood that we'll have to use force in the future. The other things that we're doing right now are to better study our use of force on an ongoing basis, so our reporting is better and will continue to get better. But more importantly, when an officer, at that moment that an officer chooses to use force, in that split second, we can only train so much on that. But all the activities that an officer and the department go through before the officer is in that position are more important, I think, at reducing the need to use force in those like in those cases that you're thinking of. The questions that the dispatcher asks when they're on the phone with whoever is calling the police, what the dispatcher says to the police officers when they're on their way, where the officer parks, how they approach, whether or not they apply their crisis intervention training, their de-escalation training, how they search the building, all those things, if done well, and we're continuously improving in those areas in order to reduce the need for force, then it's less likely that we'll need to use the taser. That's where we're going to find the greatest change in how often we use force in those other areas.
Thank you.
Okay, George Brown.
Thanks. Yes, I agree. It's at that moment of the confrontation. That's the officer makes that decision. And he doesn't have a heck of a lot of time to go through that file card in his head. And so you go. He's going to go on his experience, what he's learned from during his training and his probationary period, and all that his own experience. And he's going to make a decision, and hopefully it will always be a good one. And he's going to go by. But there's a job description. This is it. And it's the citizens who really ultimately decide on the job description for not just the police officer, but for all of the city employees. So it is really ultimately now, we're going to, I'm willing to accept this as it is. And like Councilor Fryer said, we may have to tweak it a little bit in the future. Something may come up, we'll see. But if the worst case scenario, if a whole bunch of problems surfaced, and we may decide that we don't want tasers, and that would be within our purview. Also, there's two major metropolitans, two huge cities, and San Francisco's over 1 million people. Memphis is pretty big, and they don't use tasers. I don't know, I think it's still acceptable, useful tool. But I just wanted, I mean, like in a Western liberal democracy, that's how it works. It's the elected officials are the ones that set the job descriptions for all of the municipal employees, including the police. I mean, ultimately, the ultimate decision is with us. Do we want to consult with the police? Absolutely. It would be foolish to just all of a sudden just start rewriting policy willy-nilly, That would be crazy. That wouldn't make any sense. But I just wanted to remind everyone that the ultimate decision really does rest with us. Thank you.
I've got Alan and George polling for final. I just wanted to say this, that this is our opportunity for the chief to hear us. He is, so that this is useful. That's why we're doing this, and we got to use the hard work that went before. So that's really good. I guess what I want to say is, yes, I think we all understand that taser usage is controversial. I think we also have to remember that we got to using tasers because our community asked us to step forward and come up with something that was short of using lethal weapons. And so we put it to the test, and we're trying to learn how to use it better and better. Tasers are dangerous. That's true. But we want to prevent the escalation for more lethal usage, and that's what we're trying to learn how to employ carefully. I guess for me, the thing that our department, I think, is admired for the fact that we use our weapons so rarely. That's good. That's something to be proud of. I hope we can apply the same standard to taser usage, that we will employ it very prudently and carefully, and then we'll be proud of that as well. Rarely using, but using when we need to. I appreciate the fact that you, Chief, and the Police Commission agreed that we needed to tighten our policy, and you worked hard to do that. And as you've all expressed, it's a work in progress, and we may need to figure out other changes that may need to be made over time. I know there are people who don't want us to use tasers at all, and I know there are people who want a moratorium, but I feel that there are legitimate usages for this tool. It's just a matter of us really perfecting the usage of it to best meet the needs of our community and to be responsive to our community standards, I think, is what this is, and our desire for us all to be safe. So I'm supportive of this, and I wouldn't be surprised to see you make a few more changes before you put it into practice. Alan, you're next, and then George.
So the question, I think, in front of the council is, should we approve this policy or not? And I understand that we don't want to get into the minutia of departments and what they do and do not do on a daily basis. Until and unless there's a procedure, tool, or policy that elevates to such a level that of significant public impact or discussion. And I think this is one of those rare cases. The fact that we rarely do this, that we actually ever talk about this, makes my point. And I believe that unless we as the council take action on this and accept this policy, it will remain controversial because it hasn't been accepted by the council. I'm willing to accept this policy as written and thank the Police Commission for its hard work and in bringing us a well-thought-out and well-crafted policy that tightens up the use of tasers. But I think it should be accepted by the council and voted on by the council.
My only concern about that, Alan, is whether you, aside from any issues about whether it's our purview, is tying the hands of adjusting it. That's my only concern about, and maybe that you take care of that by accepting it and not adopting it. But I just wouldn't want to make it so that it doesn't remain a flexible document that we can change as we learn.
Yeah, and I did use the word accept as opposed to adopt, which is a term of art on the council. And for those watching on television, it's when we approve something, it means that we approved it, and then you can't change it unless we come back to us. If we accept this, we accept reports, we accept a lot of different things that are subject to change. So I will.
Let's let George
I'll
Polling.
let you do that, Mike.
Let's let George Polling have his turn, then we'll put it on put it out there.
Was Alan done?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank Chris. I spent almost 30 years in law enforcement. I tried to figure out a way to term it, and it's identify the unidentifiable and anticipate the unanticipatable. That pretty much sums it up. The 30 years I spent in there, I never thought I'd hear it put so succinctly. And to Andrew's comments about, this is the chief's purview. It's not our responsibility to set policy. I think if we start accepting or approving policies now, where are we going to end up? What size tires they put on the trucks out at the shops? And actually, the way it's written, I can't accept it because of that one section that I think needs to be reinstated. So, we're just going to go round and round and round. So that's why we hire a city manager that hires a chief that can run the department and set his policies and procedures for his men. I think we need to stay out of the chief's business and let the chief run his department.
Betty, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, I think it's the public's business, and I do think there's a great deal of public interest. We've all heard from people who are very concerned. There are people who will be speaking at the public forum tonight. If we do anything, we should first we should have a public hearing, and then we should decide whether and I do think this is policy, and I think it's within our purview to accept the policy. But I think first we should have a public hearing and have much wider input from the public before we do anything else.
Andrea?
Well, I don't disagree with the public input, but I do think, I tracked this pretty closely because I asked the police commission to do this, and, Alan and I talked about it, and he put the motion on, but, I had really thought about it. And I think that we're never done with our work, actually, so I shouldn't say we've done our work. But I think we've done this, given this particular subject, a lot of time and a lot of interest, and that was due to community asking us to. And I feel like we've done our part that we could do as far as giving the commission the direction to please look at this policy a little bit closer, which they took 11 months to do. I know that there was a lot of input before and after the meetings. I went to the, and I think you were there, Betty, to the TASER forum that they had. So I'm more than fine to accept this, to not accept this, to have another public hearing. Whatever the will of the council is fine with me, but I think that we've given this much more time and a lot more energy in direction to the council and to the staff time. I know that the staff was at every one of these meetings. I appreciate Linda and Randy back there. I know you guys worked really hard on this too, and so I wouldn't want the staff to spend any more time on this personally, but I'm more than willing to, if you want to have a public hearing on it, if you think that we're going to be able to attract other people who are interested in sharing their opinions with us on this, I'm all for that, but I really think that the commission did a lot of work around this.
Thank you. Yeah, as a member of the commission, we spent a good deal of time, and I just was on the full body, not the subcommittee that worked for nearly a year on this, tearing apart every single word. So I tend to feel like George does. I mentioned that I would be willing to put a motion on the table if it was the will of the body. But my personal opinion is that it's inappropriate for us to do that because this is a policy that the chief would get from the police commission, just like any of the numerous other policy recommendations that the police commission has made to the chief over the years. This is no different than any of the others in terms of its form than has been the case with previous use of force discussion. Perhaps Tamara can help me with all the policy recommendations that we've put forward from the Police Commission to the chief so that we have a police operations manual that is much more efficient and reflective of the community's values. This, you're right, Alan, I believe is a much higher profile in the news as an issue, but as an issue of appropriate governance, this is a policy that is the chief's administrative policy. Now, if it's the will of the body, I could say we could make a motion to accept the commission's work and recommend it to the chief as the body has already done the work on it. I wouldn't have any trouble endorsing it, and I would hope everybody else could work along with that as well. So I guess I'll move to accept the Police Commission's draft policy. I got it. Thanks, Ed. I think I would move to accept the Police Commission's draft policy and endorse it to the chief.
Moved. Second as a matter of form, but I will not vote for it at this time.
Okay. I've got Alan and then Chris. You don't need it. Chris.
To me, what I was looking for was a way to be supportive of all of this work without getting into that, are we meddling or not meddling. Accept is okay, but the word that I thought, which actually is incorporated in the motion, maybe we could make it more forceful, is the notion of endorsing it. And I think if the council endorses all this work, you're putting a stamp of approval on it. You're saying this is work that we endorse. It sends a message out to the community that the council has listened to it, endorses the work that's been done, but is not trying to control it. And to me, that's a better word to use than, even if you accept it, that implies that somehow there's an authoritative role here, which I don't want to, I want to be supportive. And I think endorsing it sends the right message of support without giving the impression that we were trying to control things. So if you were willing to accept it friendly, that really what we're doing is we endorse.
That was part of my motion, that we endorse it on to the chief.
Accept and endorse.
Okay, with the emphasis on the endorsement piece, so that it really sends a clear signal we're trying to be supportive but not controlling.
So it is accept and endorse. All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In opposition, 2. It passes. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Police Commission. Thank you, Chief.
Did you see this down here?
The cops and the sheriffs.